All right, welcome back to the Anthony Jordan TT trial update. Was it day 7? Day 7. All right, and today one of the main witnesses took the stand in Antonio, Washington. But first, they finished off the cross of Brandon Burke, the FBI agent that was on at the end yesterday, and he wasn't on there much. He wasn't on there very long, and don't know exactly how the cross went, but I'm sure a lot of the same stuff. And again, this trial is just going to come down to whether the jury believes all the stuff from the cooperating witnesses. And basically, anytime you use cooperating witnesses, that's what it comes down to, are cooperating defendants. So, and then Todd Miller took the stand. He was the task force officer that pulled over Demetrius O'Neill yesterday after they observed some stuff over there on McLaren. And he just testified that the surveillance followed him to 8430 Hall Street, and he was pumping gas, and they got out of the car and eventually got a half a key from him, and they went into the operation that went down on Theodosia, where they put the fake dope in the what was it, John? The rear differential. Still don't know what a freaking rear differential is. But anyway, that was just the wrap up of stuff we've already heard. And then Antonio takes the stand. And he's 40 years old. He grew up in North St. Louis, Fairground Park. What we're going to do is set up they talk about the drug dealing, and then they talk about the violence. So we'll start out with the drug dealing. Started out dealing drugs when he was 12, 13 years old. Moved up the chain, similar to what we heard from Derek Terry, and moved up and then started dealing big time dope. He met TT in 2006 through Darwin Scooter Anderson. And Washington stated that he was dealing to TT right off the bat of after they met, 3 to 5 keys every 2 weeks, something to that effect. And over the next couple of years, they become very close. As they start going through their relationship, they become extremely close. And then Washington, they asked him, who was TT's people, who was his crew. And he identified Lil Greg was his workhorse. He mentioned Stank, Cootie, and Mike. And then by 2008, they're thick as thieves. They're pretty much together every day. And then when he threw out there, they said they always carried guns relative to the dope game. Normal stuff like that. Asked about Derek Terry. How did he know Derek Terry? He said he knew him through TT. He didn't communicate with Derek Terry other than through TT. He said that Derek, at one point, he knew that TT gave Derek $15,000 when he got out of jail to help him get on his feet. And I would imagine that was then turned into the dope game. So they're all dealing dope together, according to Washington. Washington has a strong connection to Houston. Washington also testified that he was in the National Guard. So the National Guard allowed him to move around, and he trained in Houston or in Texas. I believe it was Houston. If it was Dallas, but I believe it's Houston. So he had a strong connection there. He also had family there. He grew up a couple years in that area. And he develops a plug out of, a plug is a source of supply, out of Texas, but I found it interesting that the plug's name was Sterling Pluggett. Pluggett the plug. So and then as they're going along, Pluggett the plug gets arrested. So they kind of get away from him, or they definitely get away from him. They calm down for a little bit. And at one point, Washington moves to Kansas City because he's got information from another plug that he can make more money. He moves to Kansas City and sets up a courier operation from Kansas City to St. Louis to get the dope to St. Louis. And he moves to Kansas City with his employment with the National Guard. He gets deployed there and works that out. And when dope's coming to St. Louis, he's often coming to St. Louis. Says when he comes to St. Louis, he's usually with, more often than not, with Scooter and TT. That they just hung out when he would come into St. Louis. He eventually moves back to St. Louis around 2011 and enrolls in Rankin. He enrolls in Rankin and he starts going to school. But then in 2010, and again, there's a lot more said than this. I'm just trying to wrap it up to where we can get out of here in a half hour. So in 2010, AD Adrian Lemons is introduced to both TT and Washington by Mike. And Mike, they develop a relationship. And at the beginning of the opera, Washington doesn't really trust Lemons, and he only gets like a half a key from him or so, because the quality of the dope makes a big difference. So he didn't want to buy a ton of dope and then get burned. It was what do they call it when I put too much stuff in there? Diluted. I'll use that word because I can't remember the other one. So he starts out with a half a key, and TT's getting about 2 keys on the first deal, and that relationship continues to roll, and they up their game with AD. And then at one point, Washington testifies that he was up on his set on Margareta, and AD pulls up with a Mexican. At the time, he calls TT and says, "Dude's over here with a Mexican." He doesn't believe that they would bring the Mexican in, and they have a conversation with him real quick. But Washington wants to get the Mexican off of Margareta because he's like, "Please pull down and see Mexican. We're really screwed." So he kind of brushes him off, and that's how their relationship's going. And that at one point, Washington says that he started selling to Lil Greg directly, and TT found out about that and confronted him, said that ain't right, blah blah blah. So that's again, the dope. There was a lot of conversation back and forth of how much dope they dealt, and at one point TT says that Washington says that he estimates that he sold TT over 100 kilos throughout the whole thing. Again, they find sources wherever they can, and they had their own game. And Washington stated that he would often, like the half key that he got from Lemons on that first deal, he would just break it down to crack and give it to his cousins, who remain nameless. I didn't hear their name, but they would sell that crack on his set or whatever you would call that. And then they go over. So now, again, they're dealing dope left and right, according to Washington. They're tight, and then they go through the dope rules. They hit on this a lot throughout the trial. Of you don't snitch, you don't talk on your phones, you get rid of the dope as soon as possible, you don't steal from other dope dealers, you keep your money right, all the normal stuff. So, and then they go into the conversations that were had about the first 2 killings, murder, whatever. The one on San Francisco. So Washington talks about how after Lil Greg's house gets kicked in, they're having a conversation, and it's him and TT and Scooter and Stank and Pootie, and they're going through who might have done this. Obviously, they identify Crybaby as one of the suspects that probably did this. And TT tells Washington in a group of people, I think Scooter was also in the conversation, and a couple other people. He tells them how he lured the Crybaby and the other 2 behind San Francisco there. He said he caught them sleeping, which means they weren't paying attention. And that triple shooting goes down, one of the first ones that we talked about on San Francisco. And then the other one that's pretty much just in a conversation was the one about up on Martin Luther King, the double. And in that one, Washington says that Keese, and I guess that's Marquise, short for Keese, or he calls him Keese. He said that TT told him that Keese had fucked up some money, and that he did what he did up on Martin Luther King, and he did it with D-Boy. And then they go into if you rob, and Washington said that, you know, their relationship was getting to the point where now they were, you know, exacting revenge for certain things like that. And his statement was, if you rob TT, you rob me. So they were tight on that. And now they go into, and everybody, we've gone through these shootings and this, with Mike and Tez and all this. So this, he sets up all this of how this went down. So TT gets information or believes that Tez was good for a home robbery or a home invasion, robbery, whatever you want to call it, at one of his locations where he set one of the houses that he keeps product in. And so now they're going to look for Tez. And Tez, they know that Mike knows Tez from the neighborhood. And at this time, Mike owed TT some money. We're down in the nicknames now. We're down straight up nicknames. So Mike owes TT some money, and Mike knows Tez. So the plan is to find Mike, because Mike's kind of avoiding TT, but TT and Washington go out looking for Mike, and they find him. They were in a black Cherokee at the time, or black Jeep at the time. Remember the white Jeep that was, but that, get back to that white Jeep seized yesterday. So they identify where Tez might be, and this is before the gangster Sherlock Holmes thing. So they find him on their own with the help of Mike, and they identify a house up on Grove. They do surveillance, and the first time they do surveillance, Scooter is with, according to Washington, Scooter is with Washington and TT, and they're doing surveillance. They don't see him, and Washington says that Scooter gets a little, you know, the vibe was that Scooter wasn't down for the hit, and they just kind of let it go, and Scooter got out of the way, and then they later get Mike in the car. They identify where Tez might be. Mike gets in the car. They get into a Bonneville. A gray Bonneville that TT had the windows tinted, and it was over there in the garage in Sacramento. And they all put on masks, ski gloves. Why did they do that? To get no prints, no DNA. And when they pull up the night of the incident, Mike calls Tez, tells him to come outside. Now, Washington's driving a car, and he parks up the street, and when they tell him to come out, TT and Mike get out of the car, and they start walking. TT has a high-powered rifle. He's got an AK. Mike's got a .45. And when they get out of the car and go walk, Washington says he hears the .45 first because he's distinctive sound. He knows the sound of guns. And then he hears the AK after that. And shortly thereafter, they come up to the car, and they get out of there. And they go back to the garage, get rid of the guns, wipe down the car, all that good stuff. And while they're back at the house, Mike says that he thinks he dropped his ID in the alley during this whole thing. So they said, hey, you're on your own, go back and get it. So he tries to go back and get it. And that's kind of a summation of how the Tez thing went down. And Washington went on to say he didn't know Tez, had no idea. Well, then the information later on, obviously, and we've heard about this, information gets out that it was Mike that was responsible for that incident on Tez. So that starts going around the neighborhood, and they're getting word of it. But then Mike gets killed. So now TT tells Washington, testifies that he got a call from one of his girlfriends like 5 in the morning and let him know that Mike had been killed on the east side. So now that they get the information that Mike's been killed, and they asked Washington, or TT tells Washington, and I wrote down the quote so I got it right, nobody going to walk around the city that did this to my partner. And so that meant, you know, retaliation was coming. And they asked TT what happened next. He says, that's where the homework started. So Now and we've heard how they identify everybody, and I heard that was the Blue Mire Boys and Dee Dee Head and Hellrell and Tub. They said a Tub. I don't know who Tub is yet. I'll have to find that one out. Spree. So now the retaliations are going to start, and how he went through the Sherlock Holmes operation. And he wasn't part of it, but he was with TT on a lot of times that you would get the phone call from Gloria, and sometimes he'd have it on speakers, so they were getting the information, getting pictures, the whole bit. So the first guy they start out with, they find out Dee Dee Head had something to do with it. They find out Dee Dee Head's in jail, and then they start in on anybody that's associated with Dee Dee Head. And he says the first guy they was Blinky. And obviously we know Blinky was killed up on Colt Brilliant. So Washington did several surveillances with TT prior to the incident. And they sat up there for hours. And this is one of the things they did on a lot of these things. They did surveillance. They might have done more surveillances than I've done in my whole life. In 21 years, I have a severe ADHD problem, which that wasn't my forte of sitting on houses. So my bosses knew not to put me in a position to fail, so they didn't put me on point too often. But anyway, they surveilled the Dismas house. They had a picture of him. It says they didn't see him. And then the day of the incident, he gets word that it happened. Well, you're probably like, why is he not with him? Well, he was in school. So he went to school at Rankin from 7 to 4:30. So he was actually in school. Here's the news. When the news comes down, he's talking to TT, and TT was extremely proud of his tight gunfire pattern. Very proud of that. Said, told him that D-Boy was with him when he did it, and then he went to that government's plates and why they put government plates on cars. He actually said they knew it was a government facility, put government plates on, and kind of blend in. And the other thing that he mentioned during his testimony is that they would try to get cars. He called them high level cars or Audis, stuff that kind of fit in. And he says you can't be running around in a raggedy car doing what we were doing because you get pulled over by the police. So that's why you're getting a lot of these BMWs, all the nice cars. So that was part of their plan. So that was, and they did that particular murder in the Audi, and that Audi was later painted white. So we'll see what happens there. Then they went back to the garage on Margaretta again, got rid of the mask, all that good stuff. So the next one they're going to do is Hellrell. So now they're on the Hellrell. They get information, same way they get information, and then on July the 1st, they get word that he's in the Loft. And the Loft was a nightclub on Olive at the time. Got a call that he was in there. They were in a black Jeep Cherokee in this incident. And they kept circling the club. They finally see him come out. And they follow him down Grand to 70. And we all heard what happens from there. There's numerous shots fired, but he survives. And at the time they both had Glock 25s with 30 rounds in them each. And at one point, Washington says that as they were driving, he was in the passenger seat, and he got up out of the sunroof and was firing his gun into that car, hoping to hit as many people as he could. TT was also shooting, but they and then they went back to Sacramento, and they talked about how some of the shell casings came in the car. They cleaned out all the shell casings they could, got rid of the firearms, and he said that Jeep was later painted white. So now they go on, and they realize that they haven't hit him. They get information, so they continue to search for Hellrell. He said they did some surveillances on the south side, and then they heard about Evans, so they went and did surveillance on Evans. Finally find him in there. They find him there. And Kenny, let's see, they do surveillance for about 4 hours, and they got binoculars the whole bit. And they're looking for Hellrell, and they see him with his binoculars. So at the time when they see him, though, they're in their personal cars. So I'm sorry, Washington's in his personal car. So he sees Hellrail through his binoculars, and he was dancing on the porch. So he tells TT that he's dancing on the porch, and and then TT comes and does what he needs to do. So that's when Hellrail gets shot. Then they talked about how he was on life support or something to that effect in their conversations after that, checking on that status of him. But he said, obviously we know that he survived that particular incident down the road. And then TT gets rid of the guns they used. And let's see. So now now they're on to Spree. And the Spree one was good because at one point they're doing surveillance on the house just like they've done before, and they see a lady walking out of the house. And so they follow the lady to a gas station, and Washington gets out, goes into the gas station with her and starts flirting with her, and ends up getting a phone number and a name. So then they verified that that was Spree's mom. Somehow, I don't know exactly how, but they verify that that's his mom. They later do some more surveillance, and they finally find Spree, and they have that little run and gun battle. He gets hit in the leg. So that was that.
Is that a shooting spree?
A shooting spree. That was he's the third of the shooting spree. That was on Salisbury, and then so now the word's getting out that these guys, now it's getting out that TT and Washington might be doing this stuff. So now this is where Parker G comes in. Word gets out that Parker G is orchestrating a retaliation against them. So now they're looking for Parker G. And as we know, they find Parker G in the Yukon in front of Marsh's bar. Then they go to how they found him is that they were just driving around and they see his car. They had spotted it before, but Washington spots him in his own car, tells TT, I just saw him. They go back to Sacramento. They get into So they go back on Sacramento and they get into an Infinity. We've heard some testimony about the Infinity. And then when they get back, they see him driving in the area in the Yukon, in the area of Natural Bridge and Marcus. So they follow him. He gets out of the car at Marsh's bar, near Marsh's bar. TT has an AR-15, and as they drive by, he just lights the car up, and lights everything up around it. As we know, an innocent lady, Clara Walker, fortunately gets hit inside of her residence during the wild gunfire, and Washington just calmly drives by after all the shooting, and they go back to the house on Sacramento again, go into the garage, they had masks, gloves, the whole MO of exactly how all the rest of them have gone down. Now this is the one here, now we're going to get into the Michael Gridiron Yellow Mac, goes by Yellow Mac murder. So they identify, again they do surveillance, and they identify that he's living up on Raleigh. So when they're going to go out and do their surveillance again, and they find that a house right across the street, a vacant house, had a padlock on it. They had Kenny, and you've heard Kenny's name. Kenny does a lot of stuff for him. He's the guy that gets gas, apparently in the gas can to fill up the cars, stuff like that. But Kenny, he cuts off the lock, the padlock, because the door had been kicked in so many times. Apparently now they're putting a padlock on it. Well, they cut the padlock, they get in the house, and now they're going to conduct their surveillances from that house, looking for Yellow Mac. So, and they, days and hours in freezing cold, they were sitting in this house waiting for him to come home. And they see him the one day, but he's got like 3 other cars that were with him, or 2 other cars. There's too many cars around, so they didn't do anything. So the day of the incident, they're in there again, and they're about to give up, and they're leaving, and they see him pull up. So now they're going to come up with a plan. They get back in the house, and there's a passenger in the car that he pulled up in, and he's inside now. So as the plan was that when he comes out, they're going to walk out of the house. TT, his assignment is to get Yellow Mac as he comes out of the house, and Washington was going to shoot the passenger and kill the passenger. So right when Yellow Mac comes out the door, they go down the steps, and Washington was explaining that he had his hand on TT's shoulder and was walking kind of behind him. I don't know if it's because he didn't trust TT at the time or whatever it was. But as soon as TT then starts to shoot at Yellow Mac, then he starts to shoot at the driver. Well, TT runs out of bullets. They each had, TT had an AK and Washington had an AR. TT had 30 rounds and Washington had 60 rounds. He had 2 clips. So TT runs out of bullets, but Yellow Mac is still moving. So Washington changes his attention and then kills Gridiron. I mean, he might have been mortally wounded already, but Washington finishes him off pretty good. All right, after they get done shooting up the entire place on Rolla, he says they walk backwards, and then they get to their car and they go back and very calmly drive back to Sacramento. And then they said, this is where it gets kind of interesting. When I say interesting, I found this interesting where they said, how they get rid of guns all the time, but in this particular incident, they took these 2 guns to the gun show in St. Charles, the convention center in St. Charles. And he said that they dealt with some fat white dude from the Boot Hills, and they went by the name of Jamal and Hakeem when they went to do this gun show. And what they did, when you trade guns, apparently you don't need paperwork or whatever, so they traded these 2 guns with God knows how many bodies on them, and they give it to the fat white dude from the Boot Hills, and they get 3 pistols in return. So they traded out guns, and now they got 3 new guns to do whatever they need to do. And so that was interesting, to say the least. So then, so Washington says that somewhere around in 2014, he stopped dealing cocaine and went into heroin because he thought it was more profitable. And then he gets arrested later for his heroin dealing. And later the police come to him, and he lays all this stuff out, and he becomes one of the main witnesses in here. And then what you're finding, though, is that a lot of the stuff he told them is they're corroborating a lot of this through other, because like I said, anytime you're using cooperating defendants, you're going to have to corroborate what they're telling you, and they continuously go through this, and he decided to cooperate and laid all this out. I think there was they tried to put a little thing in there. He was kind of scared of TT. And one of the things that they brought up earlier, if you remember, so right about the time Washington starts cooperating, he disappears. He's not around anymore. And then he gets information that they might kill his mom. And if you remember back on that testimony when Derek Terry was testifying that him and TT went and found his mother, and Derek Terry said, if you shoot her, I'm going to shoot you. So there was that going around. So it could be some incentive, some extra incentive there, not just cooperation, but the fact that the word was out there that he was trying to kill his mother might be behind some of this. But yeah, it was and again, trying to keep this in a short period of time. There's a lot more said, but that's kind of the gist of it all. We've heard a lot of this stuff, and now they're going to probably tie a lot of this evidence together with investigators. So we'll see what that brings. But like I've always said, if you have any questions, make sure you just
I have a question.
Yes.
What's TT's demeanor while he's testifying today?
You mean Washington?
Yeah.
It's Washington. Washington's demeanor, he was very, very calm. Then the defense started to question him, and my video went out, the video feed in the overflow room, went out, and I was not going to just, and it got towards the end of the day. This is probably like 4:30, so I didn't want to go into the courtroom. But the defense that I heard, they were going after the fact that he had met with prosecutors a tons of times, policemen, to lay out the story. And, I wasn't real impressed at the time. They were just going through normal stuff. But I told my girl, Katie, that I'm going to need to get an update on the cross-examination. She said, fine. Tomorrow, too, is that with the weather coming in, there's a possibility that court might be canceled, so we don't know. But yeah, they ended with Washington on the stand, still under cross-examination. And this is just going to come down to who they believe. Pretty wild case. Well, I hope that gets you, hope that all made sense and kind of keeps it going. Oh, and one other one is we are going to have on our regular podcast, Katie Cole is going to be our guest this Thursday. A couple more programming notes is that there's no court on Friday or Monday. So that podcast will drop on Monday. We're going to talk to Katie about this case, get a different view other than from an old white ex-cop, get her view of what's going on. And then she also covered the Kim Gardner tumultuous tenure. So she probably get a couple questions about that. But really appreciate all your guys' support and having fun. Had another girl come up to me today, had to take a selfie with her. So that was kind of funny. And but yeah, thanks again for the support. Like, subscribe, and share. Peace!